The room started to tilt before my knees even gave up. 1 second, I was standing under the crystal chandelier at the Wexler's Winter Charity Gala, pretending this glittering Philadelphia ballroom was just another polite night. The next, the air thickened, my vision smeared at the edges, and my stomach turned with a slow, vicious certainty. Something had been put in my drink. I was 7 months pregnant. I knew what normal nausea felt like. This wasn't that. This was a foreign heat crawling up my throat, a fog pressing behind my eyes, like someone had reached into my bloodstream and twisted a dial. My hand went to my belly first, not even thinking. Our baby shifted, a small roll like a question mark, and fear snapped through me sharp enough to cut. Have you ever felt your body learn the truth before your mind was ready to admit it? The ballroom was a postcard of expensive happiness. White marble floors, a string quartet beside a towering Christmas tree, perfume and champagne and winter citrus so rich it made my head ache. The champagne flute slipped from my fingers. I grabbed for it too late. It fell in slow motion, spun once, caught the chandelier light, and shattered on the floor with a crack that sounded wrong in a room built for soft music. A few heads turned. The quartet missed a beat, the kind of pause that asks whether a woman falling is a tragedy or a spectacle. My palm stung. A clean slice where a shard had kissed my skin. Blood welled up, vivid against my silver gown. It didn't even hurt the way it should have. The drug in my veins was already stealing the edges of pain, the edges of control. I tried to breathe. I tried to stay upright. My fingers caught the edge of a silk tablecloth as my knees buckled, and the fabric pulled with me. Crystal and china slid, clinking and toppling, wealth crashing into itself. All I could think of was the baby, not the donors, not the cameras, not the whispers that would spread by morning, just the tiny life inside me that had trusted my body to be a safe place. And Noah. My son's face flashed behind my eyes. 7 years old, missing one front tooth, the kind of grin that kept me standing when I was a single mom counting dollars at the grocery store and praying my beat-up car would start. He was at home tonight with a sitter and security men stationed outside our building like shadows. That detail still didn't feel real to me. I had spent years measuring safety in exits and locks and the sound of footsteps in a hallway. People in this room saw the dress, the ring, and the man I married. They didn't see the old reflex underneath. How my heart always raced when a room went quiet. My cheek hit cold marble. The ceiling swam above me, gold trim and painted angels staring down as they'd never seen a woman fall in a room full of people who didn't know what to do with her. Then I saw him. Across the gala floor, through the crowd of donors and politicians, Gabriel Rourke stood perfectly still. My husband. The man everyone feared so much. They called him a businessman out loud and something else in private. His expression didn't change, but his posture did. Subtle as a blade sliding out of a sheath. The air around him tightened, like the room itself was holding its breath. It hit me in that dizzy, terrifying instant that Gabriel's calm was never calm. It was planage. I tried to lift my head, to shape a warning, to tell him about the champagne and the darkness pressing in. But my tongue felt thick. My body was sinking, my senses slipping like wet gloves. Somewhere near the far wall, I caught sight of a man I didn't recognize. He'd been smiling earlier, watching me like I was part of the decorations. Now he wasn't smiling. Now he was edging toward the exits, eyes darting like he could hear the trap closing. And that was when the truth landed heavier than the poison. This wasn't an accident. Someone had decided my baby and I were acceptable targets in a room full of witnesses. Gabriel started walking. I watched the nearest guard straighten, hands touching earpieces, and I understood the gala was over. The hunt had begun for me tonight. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He moved the way a predator moves when it knows the prey has nowhere to go. People stepped back without understanding why. A senator stumbled, drink sloshing. A woman in pearls pressed herself against the wall, manners dissolving into instinct. As my vision narrowed, I pressed my bloody hand to my belly like a promise. If you've ever wondered what real power looks like, it isn't loud. It's the moment you realize one man can turn a ballroom into a cage with a single step. And Gabriel was already closing the door. Gabriel reached me before the crowd decided whether to help or just watch. His hand slid under my shoulders and knees, lifting me off the marble as if I weighed nothing. The room swung sideways. My stomach heaved, and I tasted metal. I clutched his lapel with my bloody fingers, and my other hand stayed pressed to my belly like I could anchor our baby by will alone. He smelled like cold air and cedar. His heartbeat was steady against my cheek, and that steadiness warned me. Gabriel was only this controlled when he was planning exactly how to end something. The string quartet faltered, then stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the music because it gave panic room to grow. Chairs scraped. Someone gasped. The chandelier kept throwing light across the floor like this was still a celebration. It wasn't. Men in black suits appeared along the walls, the way shadows appear when a storm slides over the sun. One moment the ballroom had been full of donors and polite laughter. Next, it was full of guards. I saw earpieces, gloved hands, eyes cutting toward every exit at once. Phones rose in hands like weapons. Screens glowed. Camera lights blinked. Then those phones vanished just as fast. Guards moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, taking devices and pocketing them, leaving people holding nothing but shock. I heard the tone of their outrage, even if the poison blurred the words. Threats about lawyers, titles, consequences. Tonight, it made nothing happen. I used to measure safety by exits. When Noah was a baby and we lived in a tiny apartment above a nail salon, I always chose the seat closest to the door. Keys in my fist. Eyes on the hallway. I survived by leaving before trouble could corner me. In this ballroom, there was no closet door. There was only Gabriel deciding who could leave. He carried me straight through the center of the room, like the floor belonged to him. People parted without being told. A man with a political pin stumbled backward, spilling his drink. A woman in diamonds pressed herself against a marble column, her smile freezing into something brittle. The powerful suddenly looked small, like children realizing the rules had changed. My tongue felt thick. The drug kept pulling me under, turning my thoughts to sludge. I swallowed hard, trying not to vomit in his arms. Shame flared for a split second, then disappeared under something hotter. Anger that my body was being hijacked, that my baby was being dragged into this. Gabriel turned his head slightly, and the room reacted like a switch had been flipped. 2 guards moved to the main doors. Others blocked the service corridor. I didn't hear an order. I saw obedience. The exits were being sealed. Have you ever watched a room realize it's trapped? Conversations died. People began looking at each other instead of the stage, calculating who might be the reason the doors were closing. Holiday decor and charity banners suddenly felt like props from a play that had ended. We crossed an area where shattered glass glittered from my fallen flute, and I saw my blood smeared on the silver fabric of my gown. The sight should have made me faint again. Instead, it sharpened me. I forced my eyes open wider, hunting for anything that didn't belong. A waiter stepped into our path. He was young, early 20s, bow tie crooked, hands shaking so hard the champagne flutes on his tray rattled. His eyes locked on Gabriel, then flicked to me, and terror bloomed in real time. Gabriel stopped. He didn't lunge. He didn't raise his voice. He only looked. The waiter's face went gray. The tray tipped. Glasses hit the marble and exploded. He didn't flinch at the sound. He just ran, slipping between bodies toward the kitchen like a man chasing oxygen. Even through the drug fog, that moment landed with brutal clarity. The person who hurt me wasn't a ghost. He was close, wearing the same uniform as every other harmless face. Gabriel adjusted his grip and kept moving. I felt his jaw tighten near my hair, the smallest crack in his composure. My belly tightened too, a hard reflex, and I told myself the baby was still here, still fighting. We left the ballroom through a side door into a quieter hallway, then into a private donor lounge that smelled like leather and old money, dark wood, heavy furniture, a room designed for quiet deals. Tonight, it felt like a hidden courtroom. I counted breaths like I once counted dollars, desperate, precise, non-stop, back then alone. As the door shut, the ballroom noise became muffled thunder. My vision swam. I pressed my palm to my belly again, begging for another reassuring roll. Outside, I sensed Gabriel setting the next phase in motion, finding a doctor, finding that waiter, and finding whoever had decided my baby was a bargaining chip. The donor lounge should have felt like a safe place. It was tucked behind a walnut door, insulated from the ballroom's noise, lined with leather chairs and a mahogany desk built for signatures that ruined lives. Instead, it felt like a private courtroom, and I was the only one in it who couldn't control her own body. Gabriel lay me on a long velvet sofa. The fabric was cool against my skin, a small mercy because everything inside me was burning. The poison kept climbing, thickening my saliva, blurring the edges of the room. I tried to do what I'd done for years as a single mom. Focus on one thing at a time, make a plan, stay upright. But nausea doesn't care about plans. It hit like a wave, breaking over my head. Gabriel shifted instantly, one arm bracing my shoulders, the other steadying my hips, and he held me while I vomited onto a Persian rug that probably cost more than my old car. The shame should have swallowed me. It didn't. I was past shame. I was a mother trying not to drown. When it eased, I collapsed back, shaking, my throat raw. My palm still bled in a slow line down my wrist. I pressed that hand to my belly anyway, because blood felt less frightening than silence. The door opened again, and a woman entered with a medical bag gripped so tightly her knuckles looked white. Dr. Priya Patel. I recognized her from hospital brochures, the kind of doctor people bragged about. Tonight her face held no glossy confidence. Her eyes kept flicking to the men flanking her, to the hard outlines under their suit jackets, to Gabriel's stillness. She didn't have to be told what the situation was. Her whole body already knew. She knelt beside the sofa and worked fast, hands moving with trained precision even while fear trembled through her wrists. She found my pulse at my throat, counted, then wrapped a cuff around my arm and pumped it until the pressure made my fingers tingle. She checked my pupils with a pen light, watched my eyes struggle to track. Her fingertips brushed my cheek and jaw, reading color and temperature the way a musician reads tempo. My mouth felt full of cotton. I tried to remember the last clear moment before my knees buckled. The champagne flute. The way it had tasted was too crisp, too cold. The way the room had tilted minutes later. Time turned elastic the second the poison hit, but I forced the memory into shape. I had accepted a drink I hadn't watched being poured. The baby moved, a faint nudge that made my chest tighten with relief and terror at the same time. Dr. Patel slid a portable Doppler from her bag and pressed gel-cold plastic against my belly. She shifted it, listening, searching. For a breathless second, there was only static and my own heartbeat roaring in my ears. Then the fetal heartbeat appeared. Fast, too fast, a frantic little gallop. I saw Gabriel's control fracture at the edges, not in any outburst, but in the way his fingers clenched once against the back of the sofa, as if he were gripping the world to keep it from breaking. I should have been terrified of him. I was. But another truth pressed itself into me, quieter and stranger. Gabriel had seen poisonings before. He watched Dr. Patel's steps as he understood them, like he could predict what came next. That awful familiarity made me feel safer than any prayer. A phone lit up in a hand near the door. Miles Kane, Gabriel's right hand, angled it so Gabriel could see. For a second, the screen tilted toward me and I caught it. Noah on our couch at home, wrapped in a blanket, hair still damp from his bath, a sleepy smile frozen mid-yawn. A security camera still. Proof he was safe. Proof someone was watching him too. My heart lurched. Comfort and dread braided together until I couldn't tell them apart. From the hallway came a dull thud, then raised voices, then a sharp cut-off sound that made my stomach go cold. Someone had been caught. Someone was being handled. I didn't need details to know what that meant in Gabriel's world. The violence was happening just out of sight, close enough to be real, far enough to feel like a nightmare. Dr. Patel kept checking my blood pressure, my pulse, and my breathing. She was trying to hold me in the present while the drug kept pulling me under. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and I clung to that as my only truth. If this had been random, I might have believed in luck. But the heartbeat under the Doppler sounded like a warning. Someone had chosen this night, this room, this drink, and this pregnancy. My eyelids grew heavy. The leather scent, the wood, the muffled chaos beyond the door blurred into a tide. As I slipped toward it, I understood with brutal clarity. They hadn't just tried to poison me. They had tried to erase my child. I woke to a low electronic hum that didn't belong in a donor lounge. For a second, I didn't know where I was. Leather and old money still pressed in from the walls, but the room had changed shape. Light flickered across the ceiling in clean rectangles. My throat was raw from vomiting, and my mouth tasted like antiseptic. I blinked until the poison fog thinned enough to take inventory. My cut palm was wrapped. A blanket had replaced my gown. My belly rose under the fabric, and when I pressed my hand there, I felt a stubborn little kick. Like my baby was tapping to make sure I stayed present. That kick kept me from drifting. Then I saw the monitors. 3 tall screens stood on the mahogany desk like black windows into another world. Each showed a different angle of the gala in grainy security footage. The ballroom now a silent movie of people laughing, drinking, posing for photos. Gabriel sat beside the sofa, close enough that his knee touched mine. His hand rested on my hip through the blanket. Not tender exactly. More like an anchor, a claim, a promise that I was still here. His other hand held a tablet, and his thumb moved with slow, surgical precision. The calm in him was polished and lethal, like he had locked every emotion away and kept only focus. On the middle monitor, the footage froze on me. There I was in silver under the chandelier, smiling the way women smile when they are trained to be pleasant in rooms that can bite. I looked normal. I looked safe. I hated that version of me, not because she was weak, but because she didn't know she was being handled. The image jumped backward, then forward again. Rewound. Replayed. I watched myself accept a champagne flute from a young waiter with a crooked bow tie. His posture was stiff. His eyes didn't hold mine. At the time, I had read it as nerves. Now, I read it as guilt. My stomach tightened. I remembered the glass shattering. I remembered the first spin of the room. I remembered thinking about Noah and the baby before I even thought about myself. Gabriel shifted the angle. One of the side monitors zoomed in on the seconds before the waiter reached me. A woman in a red dress stepped into his path. The camera caught her like a spotlight. Dark hair, perfect posture, diamonds at her throat flashing when she turned her head. She leaned in as if she belonged in the waiter's personal space. Her hand touched his forearm, brief and casual, and it still looked like a command. His shoulders dipped. He nodded once. 30 seconds later, he delivered the flute to me. Cold spread through me, not from the drug, but from recognition. I had noticed her earlier. I remembered her drifting close, all warmth and compliments, telling me I looked radiant in a way that made my skin prickle. I remembered the way her gaze dropped to my belly for half a breath too long, and the way her smile sharpened as if she'd solved something. In the moment, I told myself I was imagining it, that pregnancy made you paranoid, that not every woman in a ballroom was a threat. But this one was. The baby kicked again, harder, and anger rose with it. My pregnancy was not a rumor. It was my private hope, my second chance at building a family that didn't hurt. Gabriel and I hadn't announced it. We hadn't even told his inner circle, not fully, because softness was a liability in his world. So how did she know? I watched Gabriel's attention move from the screens to the people just outside the door. I didn't hear the orders, but I felt the room obey. Miles moved like a shadow. Someone hurried off. Another camera feed appeared, then another, as if the building itself had been wired to answer him. The scope of it hit me. This wasn't just about tonight's gala. This was a hunt reaching backward into our home, into my doctor's office, into every place I had tried to live like a normal mother. I pictured the fertility clinic we'd visited months ago under a different name, paying cash, thinking we were careful. I pictured the parking lot, the elevator, the receptionist's practiced smile. What if someone had been watching me then, too? My pulse skittered. My hand stayed on my belly, and I forced slow breaths, but dread kept slipping between my ribs. On the screen, the woman in red turned, and her face came into full view. I didn't know her name yet, but I knew what she was. She was the kind of friend who only got close enough to measure where to cut. And the worst part was that she had already been close enough to see the life growing inside me. She knew. Someone had followed. The door opened with a soft click that still sounded too loud. Two men guided the woman in red into the donor lounge. Guided was the polite word for what it was. One hand hovered at her elbow, the other stayed close to her wrists as if they expected her to bolt. Her dress was still flawless, a deep scarlet that looked expensive under the harsh lounge lighting, but her eyes were sharp in that way people get when they believe the world owes them immunity. She carried herself like the daughter of someone important, expecting a phone call to fix everything instantly. I recognized her immediately from the footage. Up close, she looked even more practiced, like she had learned to smile with her whole face while keeping her real thoughts locked behind her teeth. Her chin stayed lifted. Her shoulders stayed back. Even restrained, she tried to enter like she owned the room. My stomach turned. Not from the poison this time, but from betrayal. Gabriel did not move from his seat beside me. His hand remained on my hip through the blanket, steady and possessive, the way a seatbelt feels right before a crash. Miles stood off to the side, expression empty. Dr. Patel lingered near the door, careful not to be in the center of anything. The woman's gaze flicked to me, then down to my belly, and I saw the smallest pause. A calculation, a confirmation she already had in her head. My baby shifted under my palm, and rage rose hot enough to burn through the drug haze. I had spent years protecting Noah from men who enjoyed control. Yet here I was, wrapped in a blanket in a room full of armed men, because a stranger in diamonds had decided my pregnancy was worth trading. Gabriel's attention stayed on her without blinking. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The air around him was pressure, and she felt it. I watched the performance of confidence begin to crack at the edges, the way her breathing quickened, the way her fingers flexed as if searching for a phone that was no longer there. What I didn't expect was how ordinary she looked when fear finally found her. Not glamorous, not untouchable, just human. Minutes felt like hours. I couldn't hear every word through my own pulse, but I understood the shape of it. Gabriel pressed for one thing. How she knew, how she had been close enough to direct the waiter, who she was working for. Her answers tried to dance around the room, dressed in status and family names, and the illusion of protection. Then the illusion snapped. She admitted it in pieces, the way people confess when they think the full truth might kill them. She had been paid to confirm my pregnancy, not to plan the whole poisoning, not to mix anything herself, but to verify. To get close enough to look at my body, to bait me into revealing anything, and then to send a message when she was sure. The number was already saved in her phone. The instructions had been simple. A single confirmation. The amount hit me like a slap. $5,000. That was the price she accepted for my baby's safety. She tried to justify it with frantic logic, insisting she believed it would only make me sick, only push me into losing the pregnancy, a private tragedy that could be blamed on stress or bad luck. She had not expected a ballroom collapse. She had not expected a lockdown. She had not expected Gabriel's war room. I should have felt satisfied watching her fall apart. Instead, I felt cold. Because the truth underneath her excuse was worse than murder, it meant someone wanted the baby gone, specifically. It meant the pregnancy itself was the target. They weren't trying to hurt me because they hated me. They were trying to break Gabriel by taking the one thing that made him look human. I thought of Noah asleep at home, safe only because guards watched him through cameras. I thought of how quickly safety could be turned into leverage. If they had eyes on my belly, did they have eyes on my son too? Had they followed me to pediatric appointments? To that quiet fertility clinic months ago, when Gabriel and I had walked in under a fake name, believing cash and silence could buy privacy? My anger hardened into something clearer. This wasn't about humiliation anymore. This was a strategy. And if it was a strategy, then there were names, networks, money trails, things that could be cut. Gabriel took her phone and scrolled with the same calm he used on the security footage. His knuckles went pale as he paused on a contact, then looked at me, searching my face not for permission, but for readiness. Then he identified the recipient attached to that number, and the name landed like a door slamming shut. Ethan Marino. They brought him in like a bad decision made human. Caleb Price couldn't have been more than 23. His waiter's shirt hung crooked, bow tie twisted, and his face was swollen in the quiet way that told me he'd already met consequences. Still, what hit me first wasn't the bruising. It was the shaking, full-body tremors that made him look less like a killer and more like a kid who'd wandered into the wrong room. I sat up on the sofa with my blanket pulled tight, one hand on my belly, the other gripping the cushion to keep myself steady. The baby shifted, a stubborn nudge that reminded me why I was still fighting to stay conscious. My throat burned. My stomach rolled. But the fog in my head had thinned enough for anger to come in clean. Caleb's eyes found me and stuck there. Panic lived in them. He glanced at Gabriel only once, and his knees softened like he'd forgotten how to stand. Gabriel didn't need to touch him. The men at the door were enough. The monitors were enough. The air itself felt like pressure. Caleb's story came out in fragments as Gabriel pressed, and I stitched it together. Caleb had been approached outside his apartment 3 days ago. A man had found him in the cold and offered $2,000 for one simple thing, to make sure a specific woman drank from a specific glass. Caleb hadn't known my name. He hadn't needed it. He'd been shown a photo. I was in daylight, guiding Noah toward the car. Normal. Easy to follow. The man had given him a tiny vial, clear liquid in a container small enough to hide in a pocket. He'd been instructed to pour it into the champagne at the last moment just before serving. Caleb kept insisting he was told it would make me lose the baby and that it would look like stress, like one of those tragedies people whisper about and then move on from. He swore he hadn't understood it could stop my heart. I wanted to think that was just fear talking, but watching him, I didn't see enjoyment. I saw desperation with a pulse. And then Gabriel pushed for the reason, and Caleb finally cracked. It was his little sister, Lily. She was 9. She had cancer, the kind that turns a family into a math problem. Bills, debt, time. Caleb had been working double shifts, borrowing where he could. watching his mother sink. Lily's treatments were scheduled and priced like a countdown timer. My anger wobbled, not disappearing, but shifting shape. I understood desperation. I understood being a single mom who counted dollars twice, who chose groceries based on what could stretch, who measured safety in locked doors and spare keys. I understood doing ugly things just to keep a child alive, but I also understood this. Desperation doesn't give you permission to target someone else's child. My baby kicked again, sharper, and my hand spread over my belly like a shield. I imagined Lily in a hospital bed, small and brave. Then I imagined Noah asleep at home, guarded like a secret. 2 kids, both innocent, both dragged into adult cruelty. Caleb's shoulders jerked with silent sobs. He was a pawn, yes, but he was a pawn who had still moved. A pawn who had still poured poison into a glass meant for a pregnant woman. I didn't want him erased from the world like a loose end. I wanted him alive long enough to understand what he'd done, and useful enough to lead us to the people who had made it possible. Across the room, Sloane Whitaker sat in scarlet that didn't look powerful anymore. She had taken $5,000 to confirm what my body was already screaming. She had smiled at me and then sent a waiter toward me like I was an address. If anyone deserved the first wave, it was her. I didn't say it. I didn't have to. Gabriel's gaze flicked to me, and I let him read it in my face. The architects first. The people who had choices and still chose money. Caleb could help us get there. Gabriel pressed for details. What the man looked like. How he spoke. Where he met Caleb. Caleb described a tall man with dark hair and a scar on his cheek, an accent he couldn't place. The kind of face you remember because it feels like a warning sign. The man had kept his distance. He had moved like someone trained to disappear. Miles stepped in with a phone, showing Gabriel a still image pulled from a street camera near Caleb's building. The scar cheek profile was blurry but unmistakable. Under it was a location note that made my skin go cold. The same man had been spotted near the Wexler earlier tonight, slipping through the service entrance before the lockdown. Ethan Marino hadn't just hired people, he'd sent someone close enough to watch the poison land. The air changed before the door even opened. I felt it in the way Miles straightened, in the way the guards shifted their weight like they were bracing for a different kind of problem. The donor lounge had already become a war room, but this was the first time it felt like the war had walked in with boots on. They brought him through the doorway with his hands pinned behind him. He was tall, lean, dressed too well for a kitchen corridor, the kind of man who didn't sweat even in tight spaces. A faint cut crossed one cheek like a signature. Not a fresh wound, but a mark that said he'd lived through violence and learned to wear it. Nico Voss. He didn't look like Caleb. He didn't shake. His eyes swept the room fast, taking in the monitors, the tablet, the restrained socialite in scarlet, the doctor by the door. Then his gaze landed on me, wrapped in a blanket on the velvet sofa. For half a second, he looked surprised. He had expected me to be gone, if not dead, then out cold and irrelevant. He had expected a story that ended quietly, a tragedy that could be spun and buried. Instead, I was awake. My hand stayed on my belly. My fingers pressed lightly, feeling for movement, because that was the only proof that mattered. The baby answered with a small, stubborn shift. It felt like a warning flare inside my body. Nico's mouth tightened, and the smugness he'd walked in with thinned into calculation. Gabriel didn't stand. He didn't need to. His presence was the center of the room like gravity. He watched Nico the way you watch a man holding a lit match near gasoline, without flinching, without blinking, already thinking 3 moves ahead. Nico tried to hold his posture to project that he was only a courier, only a messenger. The kind of person who thinks that being just the runner makes you untouchable. But the room didn't treat him like a runner. It treated him like proof. Gabriel pressed him for confirmation, and I didn't need words to understand the questions. Who sent him? Why had he been in the service entrance? What he was supposed to do after Sloane sent the message? What was the real goal tonight? Nico resisted at first with that cool silence men use when they think silence is power. Then Gabriel shifted the tablet toward him, showing a still frame from the camera outside Caleb's building. Nico's own profile. The scar. The timestamp. The proof that he'd been following the operation from the start. That was when Nico's confidence cracked in a way so small it would have been invisible to anyone not trained by motherhood to read micro-changes in faces. His nostrils flared, his jaw set harder. His eyes flicked to the door, measuring distance. He confirmed it without ever meaning to. He was Ethan Marino's man. He wasn't here to serve champagne or blend into the crowd. He had been here to supervise, to make sure the glass reached my hand, to retrieve the pregnancy confirmation and send it up the chain, to make sure the result happened where it would hurt the most. Not in a bedroom, not in a private clinic, in a ballroom full of donors and cameras and whispered respect. Public humiliation, public weakness. The kind of wound that spreads through an empire faster than blood. My stomach clenched, and I had to breathe through it. I pictured Noah again, his sleepy face on the security still. I pictured the way he'd run to me that morning, asking if the gala meant I'd be home late. I had promised him it was just one night, just a fundraiser, just adults being boring. I had lied without knowing it. Then Nico revealed the part that made my skin go cold. There had been a second plan. If the poison didn't work fast enough, if I didn't collapse in front of everyone the way they wanted, there was supposed to be an accident. A fall in the crowd. A shove near the marble stairs. A stage slip outside where a car idled too close to the curb. Something that could be dismissed as chaos after too much champagne. Something that still ended with me bleeding and the baby gone. They didn't just want to hurt us. They wanted redundancy. They wanted certainty. I felt Gabriel's hand shift on my hip, firmer, and for the first time all night I felt something softer underneath his control. Not mercy, not peace, something closer to fear. The kind of fear a man like him only feels for the few people he truly can't replace. His fingers slid up to my stomach through the blanket, not pressing, just resting there like a vow. It made my throat tighten because it reminded me that I wasn't just his wife in this moment. I was his weak point. And somehow, that also meant I had influence. I forced myself to sit straighter, despite the nausea, despite the dizziness. I didn't want to be a bystander in the decisions that would shape my children's lives. I had run enough in my life. I had survived enough alone. In my head, I set a boundary as clearly as any spoken sentence. Protect Noah first. Protect the baby first. Revenge could wait behind that line, not the other way around. Miles stepped forward with another phone in his hand, face tight, eyes sharp. He didn't have to say much. The image on the screen did it for him. An unmarked vehicle captured by a street camera near my apartment block, circling slowly like a predator that had learned the neighborhood. The threat had already followed the plan past the gala. It was at my home. The moment Miles showed the looping footage of that unmarked vehicle circling my block, my body tried to betray me again. Not with poison this time, but with pure maternal panic. My stomach tightened, sweat broke along my hairline, and every instinct in me screamed one name: Noah. The donor lounge snapped into motion. Phones buzzed, earpieces crackled. Men who had been statues suddenly moved like a single machine, each piece clicking into its place. Gabriel's hand stayed on my belly for one steady beat, and that small pressure felt like a decision made physical. Family first. Dr. Patel slid in close, checking my pulse and the color of my lips, the way you check the weather before a storm. I felt the sting of a needle, the cool pull of fluids, and the slow easing of nausea as medication warmed through my veins. I hated needing it, hated feeling fragile when my son might be in danger. But the truth was simple. If I collapsed again, I couldn't protect anyone. So I breathed. I stayed awake. I held on. They wrapped me in a heavier coat, tucked the blanket tighter around my shoulders, and guided me down service corridors that smelled like soap, steam, and metal. The gala's glitter was gone. There were no chandeliers here, only fluorescent strips, and the muffled thud of hurried footsteps. Outside, Philadelphia was wet and shining, rain turning streetlights into smeared gold. An armored SUV waited at the curb, blackout windows like closed eyelids. Two more vehicles idled behind it, then another, the convoy lined up with quiet menace. I climbed in with help, my palms damp, my mouth still tasting like antiseptic. Gabriel sat beside me. He didn't waste motion on comfort, but his shoulder pressed against mine, solid and warm. His fingers found my hand for a second, a squeeze that told me he had already sent men to Noah, already chosen the fastest route, already imagined every corner where someone could hide. He promised through action, not words. The city blurred past in dark, reflective streaks. I watched rain trail down tinted glass and thought about the version of my life that used to exist. A small apartment, a cheap secondhand stroller. Leaving a porch light on made me feel safer. Ordinary motherhood is built out of tiny rituals and hopeful lies. I had believed that if I stayed quiet enough, worked hard enough, loved my son enough, the world would leave us alone. Now I understand that safety wasn't a place, it was a perimeter. And perimeters could be tested. When we reached my building, the convoy didn't stop the way normal people stop. The front vehicle rolled past, looping the block once. The second slowed. The third took a position at the corner. Only then did Gabriel's SUV ease into the curb like it was docking into a fortress. I stayed inside with Dr. Patel and a guard while the extraction happened. It took minutes that felt like hours. I pictured Noah asleep in his dinosaur pajamas, hair sticking up at the crown, one hand curled around the edge of his blanket. I pictured someone knocking softly, pretending to be a neighbor, and my chest tightened so hard I thought my ribs might crack. Then Miles returned with the first twist of the knife. The front door lock had fresh scratches, not from my keys. One of the hallway cameras had been cut clean, the wire sheared like someone knew exactly where to reach. And in my closet, tucked behind a shoebox, they found a small magnetic tracker, the kind that could cling to metal and whisper location to anyone willing to listen. It wasn't just the car outside. It was planned. It was patience. It was someone who had been inside my life without my permission. Noah came out bundled in a hoodie, sleepy and blinking, a stuffed fox clutched against his chest. He looked around like the world had changed while he was dreaming, and in a way, it had. When he saw me in the SUV, his face softened with relief, and I pulled him onto my lap carefully, mindful of my belly and his weight. I kissed his temple and swore I would never let go. I breathed in his shampoo, that innocent kid smell that always made me believe tomorrow could be better. My throat tightened around gratitude and guilt. This danger had followed me. I had married into it. And now my son was riding in an armored car because of choices I'd made to survive. The convoy pulled away fast, rain swallowing our taillights. A minute later, one of the guards leaned forward, pointing at the side mirror. Another set of headlights had fallen in behind us, too steady to be a coincidence. And above the rooftops, a pale dot of light hovered where there should have been only clouds, moving with us like a patient eye. Even the escape was being watched. The headlights behind us stayed stubborn, a steady pair that refused to drift away. Rain smeared the world, streetlights stretching into long gold scars across the tinted glass. Noah slept against my chest, his stuffed fox pinned between us like a promise. Every time the SUV slowed, my pulse jumped, convinced the next stop would be the one where someone stepped out of the dark. But Gabriel's people drove like they were rewriting the city. The convoy skipped the highway and slid into side streets, then through a tunnel where the echo of engines swallowed direction. Miles tracked routes on a tablet, calm and ruthless. We looped a block twice, cut into a narrow lane, and a second SUV peeled off at the last second, like a decoy daring the tail to choose. The headlights followed the decoy. My lungs filled, but I still didn't relax. I stared into mirrors until they showed only rain and empty asphalt. Even then, my body stayed braced, as if safety was something you had to hold in place with muscle and will. We reached the safe house around 1:30 a.m. From the street, it looked ordinary. A renovated brownstone on a quiet block, dark windows, nothing that announced a fortress. Inside, the layers were immediate. A keypad, a second door, cameras tucked into corners. Staff who moved with quiet purpose, scanning us and stepping aside like my child outranked everyone. A room waited for Noah upstairs. Too neat, too controlled, but it had what mattered. A bed, soft light, and a security panel by the door with a green line that told me someone else was watching. I laid Noah down fully clothed, shoes off, fox under his chin. He blinked at me, confused, and I stroked his hair until his eyelids dropped again. I didn't tell him stories out loud. I let my thoughts do the soothing, the way a mother prays without religion. I promised him normal would come back. I didn't know how. I only knew I had to try. In the hallway, Dr. Patel checked my blood pressure and listened for the baby's heartbeat. The steady rhythm loosened something in my throat. It also sharpened my focus. If we were still alive, then we still had choices. Downstairs, the dining room had been turned into a command center. A paper map covered the table, weighted at the corners. Screens showed street feeds, bank dashboards, shipping manifests, and donor lists. Ethan Marino wasn't just a man, he was a web. Miles laid out the structure without theatrics. A logistics company moving containers through the port, a construction firm winning city contracts, and a charitable foundation hosting glossy events for children's hospitals and youth arts programs. The foundation made my skin prickle, because I recognized the pattern. Before Gabriel, I had lived in the art world. I had worked donor nights, watched people in tailored suits write checks while hiding their sins behind philanthropy. I knew how reputations got cleaned. Money moved through charity the way guilt moved through confession. Miles pulled up board members and major donors. My mind started matching names to rooms and rooms to habits. A compliance officer at a regional bank, a spouse tied to state procurement, a museum committee member who always appeared when grants got strange. It wasn't random, it was insulation. And insulation could be ripped if you pulled the right thread. I pointed at a funding line labeled sponsorship transfer and then at the calendar. In my old job, that language was the polite wrapper for moving big money fast through channels that looked clean on paper. If we traced that transfer, we could freeze it, not with bullets, but with auditors, regulators, and exposure that made allies run. Gabriel watched me in silence, and I felt something shift. He wasn't only protecting me anymore, he was considering me. The first strike formed without blood. Miles would push documentation to a financial crimes contact. Another team would tip an investigator already circling Ethan's construction bids. They would hit his money and legitimacy at the same time, forcing him to defend on multiple fronts. If he wanted a public message, we would answer in daylight. Part of me expected Gabriel to dismiss my idea as a civilian fantasy, but he leaned closer, studying the map where my finger rested. His hand covered mine briefly, heavy, anchoring me. I realized he was giving me a seat at his table, not as a trophy, but as a mother with something to lose, and a mind that could see angles. I thought of Noah upstairs and felt my spine straighten. I was done being moved around. Finally. Then a secure phone buzzed on the table. Miles turned the screen toward us. A photo of Noah's elementary school sign, taken in daylight, shows that the name and mascot are clear. Beneath it, a second image of the crosswalk near the entrance. Ethan didn't need words. He could still reach my son. The photo of Noah's school sign wasn't a threat wrapped in poetry. It was math. A location. A reminder that Ethan Marino didn't need to break into this safe house to hurt me. He only needed to reach the soft places I had carried into Gabriel's world. If he could photograph that sign, what else had he photographed in Noah's life? My first reaction was animal and useless. My hands shook. My mouth went dry. I pressed my palm to my belly as if the baby could calm me back into reason. Then reason arrived anyway, carried in the quiet efficiency of people who planned for disaster. The safe house shifted into a new mode. Noah's name became a code, not a child. His school became a dead address. Steps stacked fast. Withdrawal paperwork, a private tutor vetted and compartmentalized, a new routine that never repeated. Guards in layers I could feel even when I couldn't see them. I watched it happen and hated every line, because every line meant my son's life had become something to manage. Noah woke up near dawn, still in his hoodie, still clutching his fox. I sat on the edge of his bed and smoothed his hair until his breathing slowed. I didn't tell him the truth. I told myself the truth instead. Childhood should not require exit routes, and yet ours did. Downstairs, Miles moved the first strike into place. It wasn't a gun, it was a bank screen. The Charity Foundation's sponsorship transfer flagged, then froze under a compliance hold. The word hold looked harmless, but it meant money trapped midstream, questions triggered, inboxes lighting up in places Ethan couldn't intimidate. Another alert followed, AIA, shipping delay tied to his logistics front. Then, a procurement notice, a warrant, was issued pending review. Nothing exploded. No sirens. Just a slow tightening around Ethan's ankles. For one breath, relief flickered through me, so sharp it almost felt like joy. I pictured his allies waking to frozen funds and ringing phones, the kind of panic that makes powerful people betray each other. I pictured Ethan realizing that the Gala had made me visible, and visibility could be weaponized. Gabriel stayed close, not hovering, just present in that steady way that kept me upright. His hand found my wrist briefly, checking my pulse like I was the only heartbeat that mattered. I could feel his restraint, the part of him that wanted to answer threats with fire. I also felt the part of him that was listening to me. The counterblow arrived before we could savor anything. A guard brought in a small package, sealed and plain. Miles checked it, scanned it, and opened it under the light. Inside was a manila envelope and a single object wrapped in tissue. It was Noah's fox. Not the one he held upstairs. Another one. The spare I kept in my apartment closet was still wearing the little stitched patch on its ear. My throat tightened so hard I tasted metal. Ethan had reached back into my old life and touched it. Just to prove he could. Beneath the toy was a photocopy of a child's drawing. Noah's stick figure family in bright crayon, my name misspelled the way he always did, the baby drawn as a circle in my belly. Not stolen from this safe house. Taken from the past, from a place that was supposed to be gone. The message didn't need words. It said he had eyes. It said he had time. It said my leverage strike had hurt. And now he wanted me to remember who could hurt more. Something in me hardened, not into cruelty, but into clarity. I couldn't keep living half in and half out, pretending I could be a civilian wife in a criminal empire and still raise a child untouched. Ethan had made the choice for me, so I made one back. I stepped closer to Gabriel and let my fear turn into boundaries. I needed Noah protected for the long term, not just tonight. I needed decisions that considered collateral because I refused to trade someone else's child for my own. And I needed a role, real work, real knowledge, not a pretty seat in a fortified house while men decided my future around me. Gabriel didn't argue. His posture shifted, a slight tilt that told me he accepted my terms as if they were contracts. The dark romance of him was never in sweet promises. It was in respect, in the way he let me stand beside him without shrinking from me. Miles interrupted with the update that wiped the room clean of warmth. The compliance flag had triggered an internal call from the charity foundation, and the caller ID matched a number that should not have existed inside their circle. Someone inside the foundation had warned Ethan before the hold went live. Worse, a second data point suggested the leak wasn't only on his side. There was a mole close enough to breathe our air. The safe house didn't feel safe anymore. It still looked the same. Still smelled like polished wood and coffee and the faint antiseptic bite of medical supplies, but the air had changed. Every hallway felt longer. Every shadow felt like it held a listener. The cameras that had comforted me the night before now looked like eyes that could be turned. Gabriel locked it down so fast it was almost elegant. Doors that had been quiet became sealed. Codes changed. Phones were collected and replaced. People who had moved freely now had escorts, even inside the walls. No one argued. They all understood what a mole meant in this world. A single leak could make a fortress into a map. Noah stayed upstairs with a guard outside his door, and I hated how quickly my mind accepted that as normal. I hated even more how my body relaxed a fraction, knowing someone else was watching him, so I could breathe. I walked through rooms like I belonged there, and listened like I didn't. Miles called it a canary trap, and I could tell he'd done this before. He created 3 versions of the same story, each one close enough to feel real, each one different enough to mark the leak. A fake transfer time tied to the foundation, a false meeting location tied to a shipping yard, a third detail about an account number that didn't exist. Each version went to a different circle inside the house, different hands, different doors, different chances to betray. It felt cruel, but cruelty wasn't the point. Precision was. The waiting was the worst part. I sat at the kitchen island with a mug I didn't drink from and watched people pass through the room. Staff carrying linens, a guard adjusting his earpiece, Dr. Patel checking a medical kit. I tried to read faces without turning into a paranoid caricature of myself. That's where my old life helped. In the art world, I'd learned how to watch for tells. Donors who needed to over-explain, volunteers who avoided direct questions, board members who smiled too hard when something felt off. Deception didn't always look like darkness. Sometimes it looked like nervous helpfulness. One of the house staff, a woman named Marlene, moved differently today. Not guilty exactly, just thinner. Her shoulders rounded as if she were trying to take up less space. She offered me tea twice in 10 minutes, and her hands trembled on the tray, the way mine had trembled when I knew I'd missed rent and still pretended everything was fine. I saw it, and my stomach tightened with something I didn't want to name. A guard's phone pinged in another room, then another. Miles' eyes sharpened the moment the data landed. He didn't celebrate. He just looked at a screen and nodded once, as the world had finally confessed. The leak had carried the false meeting location, the one tied to a shipping yard. That version of the story had only gone to Wemmer's pocket of people, and Marlene had been in that pocket. When they brought her into the dining room, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no cinematic threats. Just the quiet heaviness of consequences settling into place. Marlene's eyes were red and her mouth kept opening as if she wanted to explain, but didn't know where to begin. I watched her hands. They were the hands of someone who had cooked meals, folded sheets, wiped down counters, and made homes feel lived in. Not the hands of a hardened criminal. That was the twist that made my chest ache. When the truth came out, it wasn't greed for diamonds or ego for power. It was debt. It was a son with a gambling problem and a man on the phone promising to make it stop if she did one small thing, one harmless thing. Just a message, just a detail, nothing that would hurt a child. That's how Ethan worked. He didn't only poison the champagne, he poisoned people. He found the fractures in ordinary lives and pressed until they became doors. My first instinct was empathy, sharp and immediate. I wanted to reach for her like I would have before all of this, like a woman who still believed mistakes were just mistakes. Then I pictured Noah's school sign on that phone screen. My empathy didn't disappear. It just got placed behind my boundary. I could feel sorry for Marlene and still refuse to let her anywhere near my child. Gabriel didn't make a spectacle of punishment. He cut access. He recorded everything. He turned her confession into evidence that could be used like a blade with a handle. Marlene didn't leave in handcuffs for the police. She left under guard with a new reality. The only way to protect her family now was to cooperate fully, because Ethan would not forgive weakness. Miles built the bait from her betrayal. He would feed Ethan a controlled narrative, a meeting location that looked like an opportunity but functioned like a trap. Not a massacre, a seizure, a legal exposure, a public collapse that made his allies scatter. Later, when the house went quiet again, Gabriel found me in the hallway outside Noah's room. I stood there listening to my son breathe, letting that sound remind me why I was still fighting. I didn't need sweet promises. I needed truth. I needed a choice. I chose Gabriel anyway, fully, with my conditions still intact. I chose him because he listened, because he kept Noah alive, because he was willing to win with strategy when he could have chosen blood. And because I could feel the baby inside me like a small anchor, I insisted on building something stronger than fear. Miles's voice pulled us back into the war. Ethan Marino had taken the bait. A location ping hit the screen, sharp and unmistakable. Not one of his men, not a proxy. Ethan himself was moving toward the staged meeting point. We left the safe house before dawn, because fear loves daylight, and Gabriel refused to give it that advantage. I sat in the back of an armored SUV with my hand resting on my belly, feeling the baby move in small, steady reminders that my body was not just mine anymore. Noah was not with us. That was the first rule of this night. My son stayed miles away in a separate, secure location, with a routine so boring it felt like protection, disguised as normal life. I kept repeating that to myself like a prayer, because if I let my mind picture him in danger, I would lose the calm I needed to survive what came next. The staged meeting point was a shipping yard on the edge of the city, all rust and floodlights and empty concrete that made footsteps echo. It looked like the kind of place where men disappeared. That was exactly why Ethan came. He would never understand that Gabriel didn't need a dark corner to kill someone. Gabriel needed a dark corner to let them think they were winning. Miles ran the operation from a separate vehicle, screens glowing with maps and timestamps, and the quiet language of compliance holds and wire transfers. This was not only a physical ambush, it was a financial one, a legal one, a public one. It was the kind of war that left no heroic corpses, only collapsing empires. I watched the yard through tinted glass and forced myself to breathe slowly, because panic would make me stupid. And stupidity was expensive in this world. When Ethan's convoy arrived, it didn't roar. It glided. Black vehicles, clean lines, men who moved like they believed the ground belonged to them. Ethan stepped out last, and even from a distance I could feel his confidence like heat. He had the posture of a man who had never been told no in a way that mattered. He walked toward the center of the yard where a single cargo container sat waiting, its doors shut, a lone light above it swaying slightly in the wind. That container was the story we had fed him. Inside, he believed, was a payoff, a file, a weak point, something he could use to pull Gabriel's world apart. Instead, it held evidence, recorded confession, banking trails, the charity foundation leak, the coercion tree, the dates and times that proved intent. The kind of package that didn't need a gun to ruin a man. It only needed the right hands to receive it. And those hands were already moving. Miles had built a route for the evidence to reach federal investigators without looking like Gabriel had helped. It would land through intermediaries, journalists with integrity, and agents who hated corruption enough to do their jobs even when the names involved had money and friends. Ethan didn't know any of that. He only knew the container was closed, and closed things made him curious. The trap didn't spring with gunfire. It sprang with silence. A line of vehicles on the far side of the yard appeared, their headlights bright and official, cutting through the dark. Not Gabriel's men, not Ethan's. Federal task force units with warrants in hand, moving fast and contained, like people who had waited a long time for a night like this. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to take. Ethan froze for half a second, and that half second told me everything. He hadn't expected the law. He had expected blood. He had expected Gabriel to play the game Ethan understood. Gabriel had chosen a different game because he knew where Ethan was weakest. A man like Ethan could survive losing a fight. He could not survive losing legitimacy in his own network. When money froze, when allies panicked, when phones lit up with warnings and news, loyalty became a myth. Ethan's men shifted, hands moving subtly toward weapons, but the federal line held. Their numbers were real. Their posture was practiced. And they had something even more dangerous than guns. They had paperwork. Miles's screen showed the second wave hitting at the same time. Accounts locked, properties seized, vehicles flagged, shell companies exposed. Ethan's financial spine was being snapped in a way that couldn't be undone with intimidation. I realized then that the shipping yard was only the stage. The real trap was everywhere at once. Gabriel didn't step out until the moment Ethan turned his head, scanning for an exit that wasn't there. Gabriel moved into the open like he was walking into a boardroom, not a yard full of men who wanted him dead. I didn't hear words. I didn't need to. I read the body language like a confession. Ethan tried to smile, but his smile had cracks now. He tried to posture, but the law had made him smaller. He tried to hold control, but control was already gone. That was when I stepped out of the SUV. Gabriel's hand didn't grab me. He didn't block me. He simply shifted half an inch closer, as if his body could become a shield without turning into a cage. That detail mattered to me more than any vow. I walked toward Ethan until I was close enough to see the tiny pulse in his jaw. Close enough to see that he recognized me, not as a woman, but as a target who had refused to die. In that moment, my fear didn't disappear. It transformed. I thought about Noah's crayon drawing, about the spare fox in that envelope, about the way Ethan had tried to reach my child through my past. And I understood something clean and final. Ethan was not the storm. He was the kind of man who threw storms at other people and called it strength. I didn't give him the satisfaction of shrinking. I let him see my belly, my life, the proof that I was still here. I let him see that I was no longer a civilian he could traumatize into silence. I was a mother with a plan. I was a woman who had learned the rules and still chosen her own. Ethan's eyes flicked toward me, then toward Gabriel, then toward the federal agents. He was doing calculations, the way predators do when the prey turns into a trap. The moment his phone buzzed, he knew it was over. The kind of man who built his world on cash and favors could feel the system closing like a fist. He could feel his allies becoming strangers. He could feel his name turning toxic. He tried to move. A federal agent stepped in. A hand went to cuffs. Ethan's shoulders tensed as he might fight, but fighting the law was a different kind of stupidity. Ethan wasn't stupid. He was selfish. So he ran with the only thing selfish men understand. He tried to bargain. I watched the bargaining play out in posture and frantic glances, and it hit me with a strange sadness. This was the man who had smiled when he thought I was collapsing. This was the man who had treated my pregnancy like a weakness to exploit. And now he was smaller than the fear he'd tried to plant in me. The agents took him. Not with a dramatic beatdown. With the procedure. With paperwork. with cameras, with a process that would make headlines no amount of money could erase. When Ethan disappeared into the back of a federal vehicle, I felt my knees soften with relief so intense it almost felt like grief. My body had been bracing for death. It was hard to accept survival as reality. Gabriel guided me back to the SUV with a hand at my elbow, steady but not possessive. And for the first time since the gala, I believed we might actually have a future that wasn't built entirely on emergency exits. 6 weeks later, my life looked different in ways I never would have chosen on my own, but would defend with everything in me. Noah started at a new school under a new last name, and he didn't know it was a shield. He thought it was an adventure. He made a friend who liked dinosaurs. He brought home a paper crown from a class party and wore it at dinner like he was royalty. I cried in the bathroom that night quietly, because my son deserved a world where crowns were only paper. My pregnancy showed in the curve of my belly, in the way strangers held doors and smiled at me like I was just another woman carrying life. They didn't know what it had taken to keep this life safe. They didn't know the war that had been fought in bank screens and midnight decisions. Gabriel changed too, in the small ways that mattered. He stopped treating my presence as a privilege he granted. He treated it like a partnership. He asked before he decided. He included me in plans that affected Noah. He listened when I said no, and he respected it even when it cost him power. I learned the difference between protection and possession. Protection was a routine that let Noah sleep. Possession was a hand that would have held me in place. Gabriel had the capacity for both. What made him different was that he chose the first when I demanded it, and he never punished me for asking. The lesson I carried out of this wasn't pretty, but it was real. Love without safety is not love. Power without restraint is not protection. And a mother who chooses her child and herself is not weak. She is dangerous in the quiet way that matters, the way that builds a life instead of burning one down. If you've ever had to become stronger than you wanted to be just to keep your family safe, I want you to tell me. Would you have run from Gabriel's world? Or would you have stayed and built rules inside it the way I did? And if this story hit you somewhere deep, please like the video, share it with someone who loves emotional, high-stakes stories, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps more than you think. And I'll be back with another story tomorrow.